But I'd like to welcome you to Cafe Scientifique, Silicon Valley at SRI International. I am Marty Ritchie. I'm in the corporate communications group here at SRI, and I produce our cafe events. I'd like to welcome all the newcomers here tonight, as well as our regulars. And wondering if you knew that this Science Cafe was the first of its kind on the West Coast. It's part of a growing international trend of science cafes that began in pubs in the United Kingdom. Sorry, there's no beer here at our event, though, or ale. Events like this are designed to make science more accessible. Cafe Sci was founded in 2004, and SRI has hosted it since 2007. I want to mention if you've missed a past event or would like to share tonight's event, you can visit our YouTube channel. The URL is listed on the bookmarks you can pick up on your way out. And tonight, I'd like to welcome Dr. Giacomo Bernardi, who is professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UC Santa Cruz. Dr. Bernardi will take the fish's perspective in exploring the future of our ecosystems and describe how today's fast and expensive genomic sequencing can bridge the gap between molecular mechanisms and ecologically important questions. Also, please join us on March 11th, 1 month from today, when Dr. Nicole Crean will make a return visit to the cafe to update us on her work on marine conservation in Micronesia. So without further ado, let's have Dr. Giacomo Bernardi come to the podium.
Thank you very much for being here. It's great I was here about 2 years ago, and it's a wonderful scene to see you all here. I have some friends in the room, so it's wonderful. And I will try to mix a few different things. Some stuff is very technical, and I will gloss it over, but some people are very much into technical stuff, so I'll be happy to talk about any detail you want, maybe after the talk. And I will also show you some pretty pictures sometimes and some natural history things. So I'm going to mix a lot of different things: ecology of fishes, genomics, and the latest techniques and things that we don't understand, very gloomy stories, a little bit of all of these things. So I teach at UC Santa Cruz. I teach a number of different classes: evolution, fish biology. I also teach some field classes. We take students all over the world to study the reefs and the oceans. And I specialize on fishes. I've been working on fishes forever, essentially. And I specifically work on genetics. But because I very much like to be in the water, I also like to observe things and see what's going on in the world. So, let's see. Oh, this works. So, I will talk about clownfishes because they're beautiful. And today I will talk about a number of different things. Very, very briefly, I will talk about climate change. And then I will talk about two main things. It's almost two talks put together. And at the end, in a single slide, I hope to maybe bring them back together. And one is ocean acidification, and the other one is climate change. And climate change results in two things: ocean acidification and ocean warming. And at the end, I will talk about future directions really briefly. And so that's going to be the theme. I'm going to give an extremely brief background about the issue. As you know, we have been spewing out a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, and this has resulted, among other things, in climate change. So there are two major effects as far as the oceans are concerned with an increase of CO2. The first thing is that CO2 is trapping solar radiation, and because of that, there is an increase in temperature, both in the air, which you're familiar with, and also in the ocean. And one of the various results, there are many of them, is the melting of the ice caps, for example. So that's global warming. That's what everybody talks about. Another thing that is becoming very important as far as the oceans are concerned, maybe even more important than the warming trends, is the fact that the CO2 actually dissolves in the water. And by dissolving in the water through few chemical reactions, is lowering the pH of the ocean. So the ocean has become more acidic. It doesn't seem like by much, but it does. And so there is a number of things that are shown here, and eventually the ocean surface waters decrease in pH. When you have low pH, is more acidic. So first of all, does it really matter? And there are actually only three possibilities, right? One is that there's no effect, and in fact, we are seeing a lot of effects. So I think that the no effect situation cannot really be used. Another possibility, in fact, is that there could be some positive effects. I thought that, you know, if you increase CO2, there are some things that it must be good for. And actually there isn't. This is one of the puzzling things. And if you think about it, it took so long to reach the equilibrium that we are in, that if you're going to tamper with it, there are some chances that it's going to get better, but in fact, those chances are so small that we didn't luck out really, and things are getting worse, which is really what you're expecting. So there is a negative effect. So the negative effect is unfortunately a given, and so now what I'm going to try to talk about tonight is try to understand really what is affected. And there is tons and tons of things that are affected. And tonight I will just talk about two of those things among so many examples. There are two of the things that I work with, but there are a lot of other things that are affected, of course. And then another thing that is interesting, and that's where the genomic part comes in, and you have different ways of looking at it, is the type of response that organisms have to the effects of the increase in CO2. And there are three major sort of fields that may be interested by what is going on. The first one for organisms is a physiological response. Imagine, I mean, it's getting hot and you're sweating. But that is a physiological response that is really simple to understand. These are transient things. If it gets cooler, you stop sweating. So this is simple enough. I will not talk about these. They are very interesting. I just won't talk about it. I'm more interested in sort of more long-term things. And those long-term things, at the genetic level, there are two different things. One is gene expression. So you are subjecting an animal to something, and the genes are going to be transcribed into RNAs that are going to become proteins, and that is going to be an expression, differential expression, and things are going to happen at the genetic level. And then on an even more long-term effect, natural selection may happen, where you have tampered with the system so much that you're actually changing the course of evolution for a number of organisms. That is a part that is interesting. One of the sad things, in a sense, is that this grand experiment that we're doing that is not good for the planet is actually super interesting to me, because we're doing all sorts of things that, you know, I would never have permits to do it, but if other people do it, then it's great. I love it. It's kind of unfortunate, but it works for me. So I will talk about two things. First, ocean acidification. The ocean acidification stuff will deal with gene expression, and the warming trend will deal with natural selection. I have experiments on all sorts of different things, but that's what I picked tonight. So first I will talk about acidification. I'm going to talk for like 15, 20 minutes or so of acidification, and then I will talk about warming. So ocean acidification, well, this is the CO2 that we are putting in the system. At the bottom, you have the dates. It goes from 1850 all the way to 2100. So you have this curve here that is going up. This is what we are putting in. Right now, we are in 2014, so you can see roughly where we are, 400 parts or something like that. And if we don't do anything, it's going to just keep increasing. It's a little bit difficult to exactly model how it's going to increase. But as far as I know, all the models that have been devised have always been more optimistic than reality. And the reason for it is because we always forget some stuff that is really bad that we just did not anticipate. So in fact, things are not great.
But growing up is not an acidification. It's the other way around.
Exactly. So when CO2 goes up, there is the other curve. pH goes down. So that's what happens. Because if you add CO2, actually you are going to combine it, and once it's combined, actually the pH goes down. So the pH right now, the natural pH of the ocean is roughly 8.2, and when it reaches 8, 7.9, things are really, really bad. When it's below that, it's very bad. One of the things that I will not talk about today, but that is really the obvious thing about ocean acidification, is that when the ocean is has a low pH, corals cannot form their skeletons. And so the corals are going to disappear, not really because they're bleaching and because it's warm, which is very bad, but it's because they simply cannot calcify and produce their own skeletons. By doing that, they cannot trap CO2. By not trapping CO2, CO2 is going to be increasing faster, and things are going to snowball, and it's going to be really bad. I tell you, this is totally depressing. But we are resourceful, and as my 11-year-old son says, don't worry, technology will solve everything. So that's wonderful. To understand what is affected by ocean acidification, people have done some experiments with fishes. I'm very, very narrow-minded. I really look at what fishes are doing. There is a lot of other things that are very important. I just happen to be working with fish. And this field is very, very young, because even ocean acidification, even 5 years ago, people never really talked about it. And now people are realizing that it's a big deal. So what are fish doing when the ocean is becoming more acid? There are two main things that are affected. I'm sure that there is a lot of other things that we are not even paying attention to, but there are two obvious ones. The first one is swimming abilities. Fishes don't swim very well when the pH goes down. There is a number of reasons for it, but the simplest one is that at low pH, hemoglobin has a low affinity for oxygen. And so it's almost like if you were constantly panting. And fish have a hard time extracting oxygen from the ocean in the first place, because there is not much in it in the first place. They're always living at the edge. And when they are losing even the little bit of oxygen that they have, they are swimming not as well, and that has a lot of repercussions. I will hardly talk about it, even if my results show very strong things about swimming abilities, but I will not talk too much about it. The second thing that people didn't know about, and was discovered just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, by Phil Mundy, who is a person that works at James Cook University in Townsville, Australia, is that it changes the olfaction of fish, the sense of smell. Fish are not capable of smelling as well in an acidic environment. And so this has two main branches in itself, and I will talk first about the first one and then about the second one. So I will talk about homing behavior and predator avoidance, two things that are really interesting to work on. So some fish, I take it back. I would say the vast majority of fish use the sense of smell during their life cycle. The most famous example is the case of salmon. Salmon go back to their natal streams to spawn again, and in some cases die there. And the way they do that is by smelling their homes. Some hatcheries put some special chemicals close to their hatcheries, so the fish are imprinted on those very unique chemicals, and then they know that the fish will come back just because they can smell this minute amount of chemical that goes all the way into the ocean. So the very, very keen sense of smell. So if you are changing that, they will not be able to go back to their streams, and that is a huge problem. Okay, that's fine, that's salmon. But what happens in the ocean? In the ocean, people don't know exactly what is happening. And the reason for it is because marine fishes have a very peculiar life cycle. In general, this is a clownfish that is tending its eggs, a little bit like Nemo, you know, instead of barracudas don't eat eggs, but that's another story. What happens is that the marine fish, they lay eggs or they broadcast spawn, and then the eggs go in the current for a certain amount of time, days, a few weeks usually. And then they go somewhere and then they recruit back on the reefs. Now, the way they recruit back on the reefs is by smelling things. This has been shown actually a long time ago. They can smell the reef. Usually they can smell the mucus of the corals. They can smell the leaves that are on the islands. Reefs smell differently than the open ocean. And so, but what people don't know is exactly how the cycle happens. And so this is where I come in, where the first experiment that they did was just first to demonstrate, are fish really coming back to their reefs? Because we know that the salmon come back. You can actually tag the salmon when they're small. You let them go, and then 2 or 3 years later, they come back, you see the tag. But you cannot do that with those tiny larvae of fishes. So the way we did it is by using genetic means, and I will briefly tell you how we did that at this level.